We begin the chapter with Richard and Kaylin entering the shelter of a wayward pine. Best estimates for the current Sword of Truth timeline place the story at the end of the first day. Richard's harmony with nature is referenced again when he notes the long-tailed gar is the first thing he has ever encountered in nature that makes him afraid. Kaylin tells Richard that she hasn't slept for 2 days, and that is because it would be a bad idea for her to go to sleep inside the boundary. Richard goes outside to get some water from a nearby brook and notices all the clouds moving past the moon except for the one that is following him. When Richard comes back shivering from the cold, Kaylin shares a blanket with him and also shares that the gars are native to Dahara and that the boundary between Dahara and the Midlands has been down since the spring. Richard turns the topic of conversation to his brother and references pieces of information that cast doubt on Michael's claims of logical foresight. Richard narrates that he struggled to make sense of the things he was learning, and in the next sentence makes a statement referencing Michael as the central hub where things don't add up. The ad hoc explanation Richard comes up with is that Michael must be doing this for the good of the public, and Richard introduces this as a new fact that he uses as the base to make future decisions. Richard reveals that he has taken several sausages from his brother's party, and Kaylin makes a comment about his poor manners for taking leftovers. With the conversation centered on manners, Richard takes a moment to try and explain some of Michael's redeeming qualities. Richard says Michael seems less tolerant, snapping orders, and in a bad mood all the time. Richard immediately chalks this up to Michael being the type of person who is ungrateful and unsatisfied by their own success. Richard asks Kaylin about the boundary, and she seems surprised that people are not taught the history of the three lands in Westland. We learn that Richard's father and Zed used to live in the Midlands before he was born. Richard says that both his father and Zed told him it was a terrible time with a lot of fighting and that no good can come of talking about it. Kaylin starts telling him about the history of Panis Ral's rise to power in Dahara. Kaylin describes the formation of a new government of the Midlands to unite the lands against Panis Ral. We learn that there was a great war between the Midlands and Dahara, and magic was being used to influence the outcome in Dahara's favor. Kaylin tells us about the Shadow People and how they were the most deadly weapon used during the war. Conventional weapons had no effect on them, and being touched by one is completely fatal, but only after a gruesome and suffering death. After Richard says, "Tell me what you saw there," he triggers a full-blown flashback. Kaylin feels lost and alone and is reliving the experience of being tormented by the spirits of her dead sister and mother. The first thing Richard does is put his hands on Kaylin's shoulders and tries to shake her out of it. That is the number one item on the list of things that you aren't supposed to do when someone is experiencing a flashback. Kaylin tries to fight her way free from Richard's grasp. Richard then starts making good decisions when he keeps telling her to look at him, and by repeating grounding phrases like, "You're not alone," and "I am with you." Kaylin escalates her level of wailing, and when Richard shakes her again, she starts to drift away, and Richard forces himself to take control of his rising panic. At this point, Richard talks to her again and follows a much more textbook definition of how a person should talk to someone if they want to help them get through a flashback. He keeps talking to her and finally asks her to come back to him. As Kaylin recovers from her ordeal, the two characters bond together as Richard uses his body heat to warm the inside of a blanket they're sharing. After an appropriate period of recentering herself, Kaylin pulls away from Richard and apologizes for her lack of strength. Fully recovered, Kaylin continues her story and says that once Panis Ral started using magic to create the Shadow People, the great and honorable wizard agreed to help. And that is realized when the wizard puts up the boundary and sends wizard's fire through it to kill Panis Ral. Kaylin tells Richard that many of the biggest cities in the Midlands have started chanting Ral's name, calling him the greatest man of peace that ever lived, while the boundary was still up, and leaves the readers with the question of how he was able to do this from the other side of the boundary. Kaylin mentions all of the people who are killed by the Gars that were able to cross over in the Midlands because the boundary was weakening at the top first. Kaylin mentions that Richard's brother Michael sounded like he was close to outlawing fire. Richard cuts her off in the middle of a sentence that sounds suspiciously like she is about to connect the dots between important people in the Midlands being influenced by Ral ahead of the boundary coming down near Dahara, and Michael forming a commission to discuss possible fire control regulations. Richard uses emotional gaslighting to make Kaylin feel like her only two choices are to be a good person and accept Richard's explanation, or to be a bad person and continue to challenge him. Richard succeeds, and Kaylin apologizes for her behavior and drops the matter entirely. Kaylin then references the MacGuffin of the series. Kaylin announces that her mission is to find the old wizard and have him make the appointment only he can make. She also tells Richard that she has the power to force the old wizard to do that, while the other 5 wizards who helped her did not. Richard makes a plan to see Zed, and then take Kaylin west to outrun the next squad that he assumes must be after her by now. Kaylin gives Richard a salve to help the fly bites heal. When he applies it to the wound on his hand, he's disappointed that it doesn't help him feel much better. Kaylin asks Richard if he is afraid of magic. Instead of accepting that there are only 2 answers that are correct, Richard engages in presumptive reasoning to conclude that there are some instances of magic you should fear, and some you are glad to have found. Kaylin says she will allow Richard to see a creature of magic if he agrees that he will leave when she asks him to, and not ask her any more questions when he returns. Richard agrees to this. Kaylin pulls out a small bottle that has a shining light inside and says the creature inside the bottle is a night wisp, a creature of magic that can only be seen at night. Kaylin introduces Richard to Shar and says that she was an important part of the magic that allowed her to cross the boundary as her guide. Kaylin says that tonight is when Shar will die because night wisps cannot survive from their homes for extended periods of time. Shar introduces herself to Richard, and she thanks him for helping Kaylin. Richard thanks her and says that his only intention is to help Kaylin find the old wizard before they both travel west and hide until it is safe. Shar tells Richard that if he runs, Darkenrahl will find him and kill him. Shar gives him a clue about his future when she tells him the answer is within him and that he has to seek it, and that he must seek it or Darkenrahl will kill them both. Shar tells Richard that on the first day of winter, nothing is done to stop it, Darkenrahl will achieve a total victory and everyone will die. Richard reverts back to bargaining when he hopes Shar is holding out on him and could offer useful information if he can convince her it is important enough. Shar thanks Richard and tells him that she knows he has what he needs within him to succeed. Shar seems to know that there are no guards around and asks Richard to leave so she can be with Kaylin. When Richard leaves, Shar refers to Kaylin as the Mother Confessor and asks her why she hasn't told him her secret. Shar tells her it isn't fair to Richard to keep the secret from him. Kaylin agrees, but says she needs to keep her power a secret because Richard is the only friend she's ever had. Shar says that other people might tell him first, and that would be worse, and that he might fall in love with her before that happens. She also asks Kaylin if she would choose him as her mate. Kaylin says she would never do that to someone she cares about. Shar tells Kaylin to use her power on her. Kaylin doesn't want to, but Shar says she's in a lot of pain and reminds Kaylin that she owes her a debt that can never be repaid. Kaylin agrees and uses her power on Shar. We get our first glimpse of how a confessor's power works when Shar says, "Thank you, goodbye my love," right before she dies. Richard comes back and immediately breaks his promise not to ask her any questions by asking, "Shar?" Kaylin answers his question, and they both lay down to go to sleep. Thank you for watching this episode of Seeking the Truth about the Sword of Truth, Just the Facts. Tune in a couple of days when I will be posting the in-depth analysis of the chapter covered in this episode. If you want to make sure that you remember to come back for the full video, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and enable notifications, and then you won't miss any videos. I would also invite you to join the official Facebook group for Seeking the Truth about the Sword of Truth. Everyone is welcome. All that I ask is everyone who comes remember that everyone is supposed to feel welcome. Thank you for watching, and until we meet again, I hope that you live well. Thank you.